Okay, and we are recording. Yeah, prove it. Prove it, Helen. All right, so on we go. So just a reminder, this is going to be the last class for the next couple of weeks. So we're not going to have a class next week. For some reason, we're going to be kind of busy. And then the following week, we'll be recovering from being kind of busy.
You get the practical class because there's church, and half of this stuff is at that service. So
Oh, there you go. So, good. So, what are we doing tonight? What step are we on?
Anger.
Anger. I didn't know anger was a step. What?
It's a way of life sometimes too.
Okay, so we're dealing with the way of life. What is the step called, incidentally? It's not called anger. What was that?
Meekness.
Right, meekness. Isn't that interesting? So we keep talking about anger. So I'm looking at placidity and meekness, right? So it's just as we were talking about before, kind of accentuating the positive, right, instead of highlighting the negative. So, and again, I mean, most of this is about anger, so we'll have a lot of things to talk about. But yeah, on placidity and meekness.
What was that word?
Placidity is how I pronounce it.
Placidity.
What does that mean?
Got it.
Placid. What does that mean to be placid? Calm. There you go. Still. Yeah, there you go. Good. Still. That's a good one. Yeah, still. So we can say on stillness and meekness. Now we talked about meekness before in some of the other contexts. And what did we kind of say about meekness? Good, bad, indifferent. How about from what the world thinks? What do they think about meekness? Weak. Yeah, meekness equals weakness, right? So it means if you come by and say, I mean, that's not something you would look on a job performance, will you? I mean, think about that. It's like, your boss writes up your job performance and says, yeah, Schlack is very meek. And they go, oh boy, that's pretty positive.
In different situations, though. You can be really outgoing and very good with people, but then certain situations require you to have some self-control, I guess.
Yes, some self-control. And with meekness, probably one of the best definitions I heard this years ago, is that it's strength, how do they put it? Strength under control, I guess. All right? I mean, it's not a matter of believing that you can't do it. It's knowing that you can. And again, if you look at the example of Christ, again, taking Christ as our example, not someone else in the world, but Christ. I mean, how was he? And he says, I'm meek. That's what he called himself. He said, I'm meek. Right? My burden is light, remember? But what did he do? I mean, we saw a lot of times he confronted the Pharisees, didn't he? What did he call them, among other things? Brood of vipers? Hypocrites. Yeah, that was one of the favorite ones. We see that a lot. What else? Sepulchres, he called them. Whitewashed sepulchres. What was that about?
Look good on the outside.
Look good on the outside, but what's on the inside? Yeah, dead bones, dead bodies and stuff like that. Corruption. Death. So, and then also you keep thinking about when he cleared out the temple, right? That wasn't, I guess if you think about meekness in the terms we usually think about it, it's like, well, he should have just let him go. Mind your own business, right? You do your thing, I do mine, and if you want to go ahead, turn the temple into a marketplace, which is essentially what they were doing, right? They had to sell the doves, they had to change the money. People were coming from all over the place, or coming from all over the world, essentially the known world at the time, and so they'd have to change the money to the coins of the realm, there in that area. So they'd have the money changers there, and then you wanted to go and do your sacrifice, your doves or whatever else, so you'd buy them there in the coins of the realm, and then you'd go in and do your thing. So Jesus opposed that. So that kind of meekness, again, is that power, and I guess it's knowing when to call on it and when not to. And that's pretty much what St. John Climacus is talking about here in step 8. So, starts out, meekness is a permanent condition of the soul which remains unaffected by whether or not it is spoken well of, or whether or not it is honored or praised. All right? So, a permanent condition of the soul. So how do we get to that point? How do we make that permanent?
Detachment.
Okay, good. Yeah, detachment. Maybe some of the other steps that we talked about before, right? Humility, things like that. Detachment from the standpoint of giving up to the world, and also giving up our pride. Because it says here that it does not matter whether you're spoken well of or whether or not it is honored or praised. So, it's probably easier to be meek or to be mild or placid if someone says, boy, that's a good thing. You're nice, meek, and placid, and we want to praise you for it. And then you got to remember, he's talking about this in the monastic sense. So we want to praise you for that. And you can say, yeah, I can go ahead and do that. Now, how are you going to act? And this is where the anger part comes in. How are you going to act when someone doesn't compliment you on your meekness, but instead criticizes you about something, right? So do you pull it out? Is meekness something that is always there, or something you just kind of on the surface, where you kind of pull it out when you need it, and then you kind of pack it away when you want to get angry at somebody?
Isn't it something you grow in, like all the virtues?
Okay.
I mean, it's maybe something that you don't just have naturally.
Okay, yeah.
And I know there was one part in here that he said it comes by hard work.
Right.
And I don't think he means physical hard work, but
Well, probably some of that too, because
controlling your
right.
thoughts mainly,
Right.
which is hard work.
Right. And that's a good point. But also when you're talking about physical labor too, if you think about what's happening when you're just kind of sitting there doing nothing, not praying, not reading, not contemplating, sitting there with yourself, and what are some of the things you think about? Kind of think about that. And so that's where a lot of the struggles come in. If you can't stand to be with yourself, be alone with yourself, there's a lot of people who can't. People always have to be around other people, always have to have noise, always have to have some kind of commotion all the time. And a lot of times if you ask them why, well, I'm bored or this, that, and something else, but you're with yourself. And so what's the problem? Who can't you stand to be with if you're just there by yourself? And a lot of times that's the thing. People have a hard time just being with themselves because, a lot of times the thoughts and things like that come back. And there's an interesting story in here that I really liked, that I really liked him talking about. When he talks about, and I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit here, when he talks about, I'm about 4 pages in, and it's right there in the center of the page. He says, once while engaged on some task, so he was busy, I happened to be sitting outside a monastery and near the cells of those in solitude. All right, now what does that mean when they're in solitude? Who are they with? Themselves and their thoughts. I could overhear them raging alone in their cells. So it wasn't just one person. These solitary monks, all right, they were raging in their cells. And in their bitter fury, leaping about like caged partridges, leaping at the face of their offender as if he was actually there. My humble advice to them is to abandon solitary living in case they turned from human beings into devils. And I kind of like that because it more or less sums up a few of these pages he's talking about before here about what do you do with that anger once you encounter it, all right? I mean, here, these guys are playing it over and over again. And I know I'm guilty of that. Somebody does something to me, or I think that someone does something because I know they're all after me, right? I'm that important that someone's going to do something intentionally to hurt me, right? It's like, yeah. But something happens and I take that personal, and then I'm thinking, okay, constantly go over this and over this in my mind. What did I say? What did they say? How did I act? What did they do? And you're constantly replaying this over and over again. Why? Why? I mean, is it going to change the situation or the outcome? No. Do you learn anything from it? Probably all you learn is just to be more angry and maybe to hate more. But why do you do that? Kind of discusses that in this.
Coping mechanism.
What's that?
For some people, it's a coping mechanism.
It's a coping mechanism, yeah. But what are they really trying to overcome? Their own pride, yeah, it's the pride. You felt you were hurt, and so what you have to do is you have to play this back. Maybe in this new recording, the way things change now, you were totally in the right, they were totally in the wrong, right? Or maybe as you play it back, you did something a little bit different, and this time you got the upper hand, right? You didn't look like the fool, or you didn't feel, hey Carrie, you didn't feel bad or sad about the outcome, right? So you constantly play that back. And I just thought that was interesting about, I hope I've never been this bad, but raging in their cells and just going on and on and on. Now, previous to that, I thought it was kind of interesting. St. John was talking about some different ways to kind of, I guess, to kind of address that problem. Remember that? I was a little surprised when I read what he was talking about.
Vent your anger, to let
Vent
it
it
out.
To vent it, to let it out? Yeah, because I thought that was kind of interesting, because instead of, you kind of think that you need to repress it, right? But let's talk about that for a minute. What's the difference between suppress and repress? I'm not going to get too psychological here, but I thought this is something I read about a few years ago, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Suppress, suppress, and repress. What does it mean to suppress something?
To bury
Calm
it.
it. Yeah,
To hold it down, right. Now let's think about that.
Let it fester.
Let it fester? Okay. So let me ask you this. When you want to say raka to your neighbor, but you don't, are you suppressing it? Okay. If you look on somebody adulterously or with lust, but don't do that, don't act on it, are you suppressing that? If you want to say, boy, I'd love to murder that person. I mean, just even figuratively, right? Maybe in words or deeds. But, I didn't say anything. I'm just looking over across the table. Yeah. Is that suppressing it? Is that suppressing it? It's a difference.
What's
Yeah.
repressing mean?
So the good question. Now let's talk about repress. What do you do when you repress something? Constantly pressing it down, right? So instead of suppressing something, which is really what we're called to do, there's a lot of times, like when those thoughts, we talk about those thoughts, remember? I know Father Paul liked to talk about them circling or something like that. I know he was quoting somebody about your thoughts or your bad intentions circling around like airplanes, waiting for a place to land. Those are, what's that?
That's from Elder Paisios.
Thank you. Yep, from Elder Paisios. Constantly circling, waiting to land, all right? You can see them up there, you can hear them, but you say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to push those aside. I'm going to suppress that feeling for now and go on with my life. And a lot of times that kind of goes away. But if you have those angers and you have those feelings and you're constantly having to push them down, then what's going to happen?
You're gonna explode at some point.
I could overhear them raging alone in their cells and in their bitter fury, leaping like caged partridges, leaping at the face of their offender as if they were actually there. Now, were they probably problems with repressing that anger? I would say it probably was. And then, they said, St. John Climacus said, in order to address that, what do? Let it out. Now that was kind of interesting because how many read that? What did you think about that when you read that? What was your first reaction?
Someone who agrees with me.
Good, yeah, it's good that St. John agrees with you, yeah. But I mean,
I
what do you?
liked how he had that differentiation, where he said there's a difference between the passion of anger and the loss of temper.
Right.
And an example that I thought of, and this was years ago, it was one of our sons, and it's probably not a perfect example. Steve had noticed, looking back in the history of, on the computer, that they had been communicating with this other kid. This was when they were like maybe in their sophomore year. And this kid was wanting them to take these drugs with them.
Oh, geez. Uh-huh.
And Steve was so upset by it that he just was enraged. And he was like a different person because he's usually very calm. I was the one who was more prone to the, being too emotional. But anyway, that really made an impression on our son. His loss of his normal being temperate.
Right.
I think it really, really made an impression on him, and he made the right choice and didn't go down that road.
Right.
And, thank God, because very sadly, that young man did take those drugs, and he died. He overdosed, and he died.
Oh my.
And I remember looking at his picture in the obituary and just crying, because
Yeah.
he looked like a nice kid,
Right.
And
They all do.
yeah. And I've just never forgotten that. And that's what just popped into my
Mm-hmm.
mind when I read that, the difference, between, because he's not somebody who harbors anger, but, the passion of anger. But in that instance, he let it show.
Right.
That
Now,
he was angry.
yeah, and I would say that was probably justified, and certainly in retrospect, I mean, they probably didn't like it. But now think about it on the other side. What would have happened if you would have held that in? I mean, not just this example, but any example. What would have happened if you didn't? Now, again, you gotta temper that as well. It can't be something where you get upset and then you start digging at somebody, or you start making it real personal. You start being
No, it
hurtful.
wasn't like
for
that, yeah.
I mean, so what is the direction of the anger? What are you angry at? Are you angry at the person or at the action?
Always at the action.
Sorry?
Isn't it always at the action?
It should always be the action, not at the person. Because,
and anger is usually not the first emotion. It's usually fear or hurt.
Sure.
And, he's fearful, that
Well, it's scary.
he's going to
It's
go
scary
down
to
this
think,
road.
yeah,
So,
that's going to be
Yeah.
your kid in that situation. Absolutely, yeah. So with that anger, with that, I guess if you want to say acting out, it's not a bad thing as long as it's directed at the right reason and for the right reason, and certainly not at the person. And we talk about that when we talk about any sin, right? The old hate the sin, love the sinner, and that's really the same thing that we're looking at here. Be angry at the sin and not at the sinner, or at the person that you're focused on. So, and it was very interesting the way he was putting it here. He says, angry people. I'm reading from the Mac text here, so just so you can't. But this is right from the St. John Climacus. Angry people, because of their self-esteem, make a pitiable sight, though they do not realize this themselves. They get angry, and then when thwarted, they become furious. Now, what is he talking about there? They start out being angry, and when they're thwarted, they become furious. What's the best way to get someone who's madder?
Agree with them.
No, agree with them?
So you don't get your own way. So you
Right.
don't get your way, so you've gone from anger to furious. That's all.
My favorite thing is to say, "Oh, you have no reason to be mad. That's stupid. Why are you mad? That's stupid, right?" And you're mad about something. Doesn't matter what it is. You lock the keys in the car or something like that, and they're just having a fit. It's like, why are you getting mad? That's stupid to be mad about that. Why are you being mad about something like that? That's a good way to get someone launched. Because
Calm down.
or tell them to calm down. Yeah, calm down. Calm down.
that's what I was thinking.
Get tease them and be sarcastic.
Oh, gee, yeah, that's great. Yeah, laugh at them and say, boy, that was pretty stupid. And yeah, there's a lot of ways when you thwart that anger. When you confront that anger, is what he's saying. They get angry, and then when thwarted, they become furious. And you can see. I mean, I remember as a kid, we used to do that. Tell my wife about this. To my younger brother, my older brother, and I used to do some mean things. It's lucky he's not a murderer right now.
Keep looking.
I'm sorry. Every time, I don't know why I look at you when I say the word murderer, but it's just the way we would just be mean to that kid, and the madder he got, the more we would tease him, just because it was fun. But I mean, that's the kind of thing when you see that anger build and it turns into real fury and hatred, and yeah, that stuff. So it says, so then anger the oppressor must be restrained by the chains of meekness, beaten by patience, and hauled away by blessed love. So now what does that mean? So he's saying that when you see this anger and it's thwarted, it becomes furious. He says, so anger the oppressor must be restrained. He's talking about anger the oppressor as a metaphor. Anger the oppressor must be restrained with the chains of meekness, beaten by patience, and hauled away with blessed love. So where does all that come in? At what point? When's a good point to thwart love, thwart anger with love? At what point?
Maybe after they've had a chance to get it out,
Maybe.
because sometimes people do just need to
They need to vent.
express their feelings.
Yeah.
Sometimes if someone makes you so angry, you're never going to be able to forgive them unless you you've got to go to confession, and you've got to really get to that point where you can
We can
love
let it
them
go.
again, and you can really maybe ask for forgiveness. I don't know. I don't know how you can you have to get to that point, or else you're always
Right.
going to be angry about it.
Sure. And when they're talking about restrained by the chains of meekness, beaten by patience, and hauled away by blessed love. So what is that saying in the face of this anger, in the face of this hatred? What is he saying here?
It'll be very hard, you said.
Yeah, it'll be hard, but what are some of the things that you need to do, need to express? Calm down. They said meekness, right? Patience, and blessed love. So that's how he says the oppressor can be restrained. So when we run into those kind of situations, this is where the meekness part comes in, right? When you see somebody who's furious, what do? You argue with them, right?
Generally.
Okay. You walk away, right? Well, maybe not. How about showing love? How about showing patience? How about showing meekness? Now again, how you do that would depend on the situation. But that's what he's saying right here. That's how, again, when he's talking about anger, the suppressor must be restrained. And he's using this whole metaphor with chains and beaten and hauled away. But the point is that anger can be confronted. It can be, as he's talking here, it's like a monster. It's like a beast, right? It's like a beast that needs to be, I would say, controlled or at least contained. And he's saying this is how we go about it.
Wouldn't it,
Yeah.
Is he talking about us confronting somebody else's anger? Because I took it to be more like us confronting our own anger.
And it can certainly be. It can certainly be. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a good point. And when we confront our own anger, is it really any different than confronting somebody else's?
No, I guess I took it to be
Yeah.
like where you would, instead of getting angry at somebody, you would then go back to the last week where we were talking about compassion.
Right.
And so then your meekness would be toward whatever was angering you, and your compassion and your love toward whatever
And
it was. that was
absolutely,
angering you.
yeah. No, absolutely. And again, I'm reading from the other text here. And the way he puts it, he says, meekness is the antidote to anger. And again, whether it's anger someone directed at you, you direct at somebody else, you direct at yourself, right? Anger is anger, I would say. And you're absolutely right. So yeah, but all of those tools are the things to contain them. Now again, it's going to be different in the circumstance, so it's not like a how-to manual. It never was intended to be. But when you approach it from that standpoint, from meekness, patience, and blessed love, then you can certainly confront any anger, whether it's yours, internal to you, to somebody else, or somebody to you. So, no?
well, I was just going to comment that I would think, me personally, depends on who the person is that's got the anger issue.
Mhm.
If it's somebody in front of me, if it's somebody I care about, then I'll go through all of this. If it's Joe Blow, it's like, okay, bye.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and that's a good point. Maybe sometimes that's the best way. We know the world that we live in. Sometimes people kind of
Road
go
rage
off.
would be a perfect example.
What's that?
Road rage would be
Yes.
a perfect example. And in that situation, you can't afford to do this because they're not going to hear you.
But as Carrie pointed out, now whose anger can you manage? Now whose anger?
Just yourself.
There you go. I mean, so you come up to a situation in road rage. Someone cuts you off or makes a rude gesture, or does something to you. You have two choices. You can confront them and say, I love you, and let's not. Or you could say, let me show you my love, and
Oh, yeah.
and then you can turn that anger back. And again, by using those tools, by using the meekness and the patience, and the blessed love, you can bind your own anger. Yeah, you can't do anything about them. They're probably going to drive away down the road just as mad, and like I see it on the highways every morning. There are people running up on somebody, blinking their lights and having a fit. That person pulls over, and they're all calm and settled down, right? Now, then they go right up to the next bumper, blink lights flash, and then, or go around or something like that. That anger, for whatever the reason is, I don't know if they really are in that much of a hurry, but whatever that is, that's not necessarily directed at you personally. It's just directed at you because you happen to be the car in front of them, and they want to get around.
Don't deal with it. If anybody has issue, don't deal with road rage. Get
Yeah,
out of the way.
because people can be very kind of odd, when it comes to that point. Good. So, something here again, I'm reading, I thought this was interesting, and I wish I had the page numbers. We should always bear in mind that our own ignorance of the time of our death, keeping ourselves from anger and recognizing that neither self-restraint nor the renunciation of all material things, nor fasting and vigils, are of any benefit if we are found guilty at the last judgment, because we are slaves to hatred and anger. All right? Can someone give a page number on that? That's
I think that was toward the very end.
66, thank you. Yep, so, yeah, well, no, it's maybe closer to the middle.
Oh, okay.
So he says we should bear in mind bear in mind our own ignorance at the time of our death. Now, why does that keep coming up? We keep talking about that. It seems like almost every step is built on the remembrance of our death, right? And he explains, he comes right out, he says, are of any benefit if we're found guilty at the last judgment, because we are the slaves of anger and hatred. So I mean that, and this is incidentally St. John Cassian. If you go to the previous page here, you can see, and he's discussing that in the same context. And then he says, a very similar vein, St. John Climacus reminds us to be careful not to confuse having no cause to get angry with not suffering from the passions of anger. Let us not forget, my friends, that evil demons sometimes leave us unexpectedly, with the result that we may become careless about these strong passions within us, thinking them to be of no consequence, and become therefore incurably ill. All right, so kind of tying that in with what St. John Cassian was saying, what are they trying to say about this anger? This gets back to the suppress and repress. What are they trying to say about this anger? What do we need to watch out for?
Holding on to it.
Holding on to it, yeah. Bottling it up.
I mean, the old little cliche, never go to bed angry. Or
There you
don't
go.
let the sun
Yeah. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Yeah.
I mean, you never know. We may not, the fact we wake up and plant our feet on the side of
Right.
the bed and stand up is a gift from God. So
Yeah.
you never
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. You made it through another night.
So I guess maybe we ought to be very diligent in trying to
Mhm.
get that out and forgive and
Right.
confront those people that have hurt us.
Sure. And I mean, I don't know of firsthand experience, but I've heard of people tell about something that happened, generally in the family, right? That happened years and years and years ago. And this is a anger, this is a hatred, this is an affront.
Yeah.
Every time people will avoid each other, people will, fight with each other. I mean, most of the time, just kind of push the whole family apart. So what can you say about that anger, that bit of anger? That kind of becomes what I'm thinking about, is it becomes part of their DNA. It becomes part of themselves. And if someone says, oh yeah, what about so-and-so? Oh yeah, isn't that the person that's always mad at, and your anger becomes part of your personality, which I guess would be kind of sad. But I mean, if you have some kind of anger or something that you're constantly repressing to the point where that actually becomes part of you, part of your DNA, that would be deadly. And that's really what he's talking about here. About where was that? Yeah, right here. Let us not forget, my friends, that evil demons sometimes leave us unexpectedly, with the result that we may become careless about these strong passions within us, thinking them to be of no consequence, and become therefore incurably ill. So if you feel that you've somehow repressed it, or you've somehow been over it or something like that, without really confronting that anger, you actually you're still harboring that, and you become, as he says here, incurably ill. And as St. John Cassian says, where do you finally bring that? To the last judgment, right? So just because it's been such a part of you for so many years, doesn't necessarily mean that it's gone away. Doesn't necessarily mean that you've really dealt with it. It's still there. It's still boiling over. And you might think that, hey, I'm not playing this over and over again, but still I'm angry. I'm still harboring this anger. And it's saying at the last judgment, because we are the slaves of anger and hatred, we'll be found guilty. So, kind of interesting that we can harbor something that long, but that's easy to do.
Do you have to tell the person you're over it, or can you just be over it?
I don't know. I guess it would depend on the person.
Like, what if you never saw the person?
If you never saw the person?
Yeah, run and paths cross.
You know, I asked this question to a monastic one time, and because I had asked him, it was after a confession, and I was harboring something against somebody that had no clue that I was harboring this against them. And I said, should I tell them? He goes, absolutely not. He said, why would you stir that up? He says, you've been forgiven in your heart. Why would you stir up anything? Because that image would be projected on you then, whereas right now you're in other expeditions.
Well, I had a situation, I don't want to say too much because I'm on tape, but I've had a situation where I did confront a person, and that person just could not see that they had hurt me, that they had done anything really wrong. And I kept trying to explain my feelings and how I was angry, and then really what I got was, well, why didn't you call me and tell me right away? I mean, I guess it took a while for me to get up courage, but I felt like I had to do it.
Right.
But it didn't make any difference.
Did you feel better about it? I mean, how did you feel when they said...
I've been going to confession for a year, and we'll probably hear all about it pretty soon. So, you know, I mean, it's just something that I'm thinking, okay, now this is something that I need to work on. I can't do anything about this other person.
Right.
I've been told by my priest. Sometimes people just don't. They'll never see. They'll never see that they had hurt you so bad.
Right.
No matter what.
Well, that
and
always.
Then they'll come back to, why didn't you call me?
Yeah.
Well, just remind me to tell you this. The people we're talking about.
That's all right. We got to record it. It'll be.
I do have a question.
I
do have a question though.
Yes, sir.
This confused me a little bit. Has anybody ever read St. John Cassian on the anger or any of his 8 vices? They're fantastic. It's in the Philokalia. It's like a shortened version of the Ladder of Divine Ascent. And he contradicts St. John when we were talking about, where there's appropriate times to show anger and when there's not appropriate times. He says, the final cure for this sickness, anger, is to realize that we must not become angry for any reason whatsoever, whether just or unjust. When the demon of anger has darkened our mind, we are left with neither the light of discrimination, nor the assurance of true judgment, nor the guidance of righteousness, and our soul cannot become the temple of the Holy Spirit. Finally, we should always bear in mind our ignorance at the time of our death, which is what we talk about here, keeping ourselves from anger and recognizing that neither self-restraint nor the renunciation of all material things, nor fasting or vigils are of any benefit if we are found guilty at the last judgment, because we are slaves to anger and hatred. But isn't that interesting that in the sentence before that, he contradicts half of what St. John says. Did anybody in your readings, just from reading that one sentence, I know nobody read this, but maybe somebody else had some insight on that, because that really was a striking contradiction.
And I think we kind of talked about that when we first started, about what the reaction was when St. John says, let it out. Because it's always been kind of, at least for me, taught that you keep it in, that you don't express that kind of anger. And really, I think it's that I got this thing on my screensaver, I can't think of who he is on my screensaver.
I don't remember.
I don't remember either. But anyways, one of the things he says is be angry at no one. Be angry at no one. So it does seem to be a big contradiction of what they're saying in the ladder. And then also he points out here in his text here, quoting the exact same thing that you read there from St. John Cassian. Now he says again, and what he's saying is, and he's kind of referencing that previous paragraph here. Once, while engaged on some task, and he talks about when he hears these people, having a fit. Then he says, and again, this is reminiscent of St. John Cassian, who warns us that solitude is no remedy for anger. So I think in this situation, he's talking about specifically about solitude. So what he's saying is that just because you're not with other people doesn't mean you're not going to be angry. Just like if I go ahead and wall myself into a cave or something like that, I'll never be angry, I'll never hate, I'll never fear, I'll never lust, I'll never anything, because I'll be away from all those people that are driving me to all this sinning I have to do, right?
And then he said, just in remarks to that, I can remember how when I lived in the desert, I became angry with the rushes because they were either too thick or too thin, or a piece of wood when I wished to cut it quickly and it didn't, or a flint. when I was in a hurry to light a fire and spark it, it would not come. So all-embracing is my anger that it was aroused against anything.
Anything, yeah.
Wow.
So is part of it, so I think it's a process, right? So maybe in the ladder we're talking about, we're climbing and we're working through it. And if you repress the anger, if you never acknowledge that you have anger, how do you ever rid yourself of it?
That's a good point.
So, but the final goal is then to never become angry because you've maybe recognized it in yourself and now you can prevent it. But, you know, because, and that's what you were talking about when you walk. So I'm angry, but I'm not going to acknowledge it. Now I'm walking around with it inside of me. And I'm reacting
Right.
to being angry, but I'm not acknowledging that that's where it's coming from. And so I'm doing things that I think are perfectly fine.
Right.
And they're not, because they're really a reaction to the anger that I'm not.
But why would this be at
recognizing.
the end of the ladder then? Is the
This I
question.
do not know.
Yeah, because if you're trying, remember you have to climb the rung to get to the end. And you have to completely suppress anger before you can climb to the next rung. You know,
Yeah.
I guess because this is all cumulative, which you talked about.
Yeah.
So, but I keep saying that, but I thought I remember reading where it's not cumulative.
I read that too. that it's-
Where this, you might not go in that
people
order
get to different steps
at different times. I thought in the beginning, the first couple chapters, did you feel like it's in the first?
Yeah, I kind of took it to
So I
be
thought maybe
more progressive, because, I mean, certainly, if we're looking at this here, he keeps talking about the fear of death, the fear of death. Now, if we say, I'm not going to worry about that till step 29, I mean, then, you know, that certainly might affect how you're going to think about things, kind of like think about the long term.
Well, I thought it kind of said that, like, there are some people who will have they already are very weak, or they're already not angry really, but they really would struggle with a different step. So in a sense, they've already, their first step might have been something that they already mastered, and then.
Right, but still, and the way it's expressed is that in order to reach that, they had to have mastered something down here. And that's what I mean. I guess it's not like to get to, you know, second grade, you have to go to first grade. I'm sure that there are people, as he said, that there might be people that are farther along the ladder, but still, in order to reach that point, his whole point of this was writing this as an aid, is that in order to get up here, you've had to have done something and mastered something down here. Whether you come in there because of, maybe by your nature, who knows? Maybe you don't have these issues. I mean, there's a lot of people that you probably run into who just seem to be naturally meek, naturally easygoing, you know, don't seem to be really riled about stuff. Now, I don't know about what's inside their heart, but I would say, oh, well, you know, you're doing pretty well. You seem to be, you know, up there on the meekness scale or something like that. You might have gone that step. Now, what about all the other things that they need to remember? And again, as we talk about that, every time you come to a step, it's like, oh, and remember death, by the way. And so I was like, oh, and don't forget about death. And, oh, remember, death's always there. So it seems to be like almost a fixation. But again, the point that I believe he's trying to make, and we got to remember that this chapter is not about anger, it's about meekness. All right, so let's not focus too much. But the point is that judgment is always there, that we're not going to live forever. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to reference, I think that part that she and I were remembering, which says, no one can climb the entire ladder in a single stride, nor do the steps of the ladder necessarily come in the same order for all people. One person struggles with a certain passion that another easily masters, yet the latter struggles far more with a different passion that the former easily overcomes. In other words, what is step 10 for one person could be step 20 for another, and any given step may take many years to master.
Okay.
So it is cumulative,
You know,
but maybe
and-
not in
but
that order.
It's not
Cumulative,
sequential.
but not sequential.
Yeah.
Well, some of it is though, because it breaks it in the introduction to his book. It breaks it out into 3 categories. So the first 3 steps are breaking from the world. So you have to get to those 3 steps. And then steps 4 all the way to 26 are all about struggle against the passions. So maybe 4 through 26 don't necessarily have to be in order, but they all have to be
That makes
mastered
sense.
Right.
before you can get to steps 27 and through 30, which is union with God. So maybe
That makes sense.
maybe that's what it is then. It's cumulative based on
Yeah.
those.
Yeah, and I think maybe because, you know, we kind of joke about it and like, oh yeah, I can't get up the next step and stuff like that. But I think the ladder is probably that ladder. They talk about, you know, like Jacob's ladder is another analogy, another type, I guess, where we saw that ascent to heaven. Remember Jacob when he was sleeping at Bethel, and that ascent and descent up and down the ladder of the angels up to heaven. And again, I think that is more of an image for us to see the progress as it's made, rather than a solid way of doing it. I mean, it would be terrible if for some reason you had to punch your ticket or something like that every time you're climbing up. But no, you bring up some good points, and absolutely. But again, yeah, hopefully someone can be up there, and who knows, maybe if they're at a certain level, maybe some of those steps may be in different orders. Maybe they've already mastered them to the point they say, hey, I'm up here at step 10, but what happens if they had not been able to master something down below that? And his whole point is that it's kind of like we're taking it one step at a time, so we're focused there. But the way I see it is like it's kind of like the whole person, like the whole holistic view of things. I mean, these are all the things we can take it, we can kind of mince it and say, okay, I'm never going to get above this level here. But who knows? Maybe someone is up here, but obviously you can't go up there unless you've been able to somehow do something to master some of those other things that are kind of prerequisite. And again, this was a learning tool, so I'm sure that for every what do they call it, the exception that proves the rule or something like that, for everyone who exactly follows these steps, there's probably most of them who don't or do it in different sequence. But I think the lessons are still important, and to understand how we get up there, and that it is cumulative somehow, some way, that all of these things are going to be necessary before we reach the top, before we reach heaven. And if you've already battled those or been able to accomplish those things in a different sequence, great.
Well, they often talk in this chapter, I was having trouble with, is that, meekness in the face of injustice. It's all personal, like someone who's affronted you.
Right.
Well, I think for me, what's hard to grapple with is meekness in the face of injustice.
Oh.
Or meekness in the face of, the lack of some things you believe very strongly in, like our faith. That's truth, right? And so it's hard to be meek in the face of someone or something, some movement, whatever, that isn't representing the truth.
Sure.
Or truthful motives, or, it's hard. It would be hard to be meek during World War II toward Nazi Germany or the Khmer Rouge, right? And so that anger, I think it's very possible you could have some serious anger about those things, and so that's one of the things I was struggling with. Like when they talked about pride being the source of anger, but I think that it's hard when you have anger or a lack of meekness. Okay, you're not meek in the face of something that you view as unjust. So you're not necessarily being angry at someone. Maybe it's what they represent.
Again, it's the something. Now, this is the second page in. As Christians, we are called to take up Christ's yoke and imitate his meekness. This does not mean we are called to be doormats. Instead, it means that we are to endure wrongs humbly and patiently and let go of our anger, which is the fruit of pride. Okay? So,
in other words, like when you said you said that I want to be angry at something that I don't see as justice. The key term there is I. It's who are you and who are any of us as fallen individuals to decide what is just and what is unjust? None of us can do that.
Yeah, but I guess I think about 20 million people in Russia killed during the Second World War and 8 million someplace Jews. I think we would all agree that that's
evil.
Right.
So that's really what I meant by that. I don't think it's really as subjective.
But we speak truth. So we speak truth to injustice, right? We know truth if we're basing it on our faith and on the Bible and teachings of the church. We can speak truth without it being my truth.
Right.
It's
That's
God's
what I was
truth.
trying to distinguish.
Right.
Like obviously the big thing like that, against communism or whatever the case was, or mass deaths and stuff like that. Obviously that stuff. But when you're talking about little things to get angry of, whenever I think something is injustice or is not, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah.
But even when you're doing something at work or here or anywhere in your life where, again, I think that's where you get into the subjective, that I think this is right, but that's where I have difficulty separating the two sometimes.
Right.
Like, I think a perfect example, I guess, of that would be civil disobedience, right? Martin Luther King, Gandhi, those people who
That's what I was just thinking of too.
Yeah, but boy, there aren't too many examples. There's like 2 examples.
Martin Luther King Gandhi, yep, we'll call it a short list.
You have Malcolm X, and you have other people who...
Sure.
You know.
But I mean, I think too, when we look at it from moral causes, for me, I always have to ask, whose morality is it? And it's not a matter of trying to say, well, split that hair. But I hear, individuals who claim to be secular, who claim to believe in it's okay to kill babies, it's okay to kill people, the state to kill people. These people deserve to die, whatever that means. Yet, you have a moral obligation to give your money and give it to the poor. You have a moral obligation to do this and do that. Yet when you turn around and say, okay, well then, if you're talking morality, then don't you think that maybe suppressing somebody's right to freedom of speech, don't you think, or freedom of speech or freedom of religion, don't you think that's a moral issue too? Well, no, because this, that, and everything else. So a lot of times when I hear these moral causes that are being, especially now because it's election cycle, so we got to listen to moral causes. Healthcare is a moral cause, right? I don't know, I'd call it political correctness, but I mean, a lot of that sort of thing is a moral cause, right? If you were a moral person, then you would agree with me. And so that's why sometimes, at least for me, it gets to be a little dicey, because if we say the morality comes from God, it comes from Christ, as Christians, right? What the Jews think, what the Muslims think, what the Hindus think, I don't really know. I'm not going to say I don't care, but I don't know. But for me, it comes from God and Christ. That's how I understand the moral issues. So when someone tells me that it's a moral issue that you have to do this, 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 and this, you're saying, oh, I'm glad that you're a Christian and that you agree that, this should be a Christian nation. No, I don't mean that. We just have these moral responsibilities and all this stuff. Where's that morality coming from? So, So we talked about.
Father Deacon?
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to ask Father Gabriel, when you said how Cassian contradicted.
Sounded like he did, yeah.
Yeah, and said to never be angry. But what about where it says be angry, and yet.
But sin not.
And yeah, so.
Wait, by St. John or by
No, in
John
the
Clement?
scripture, it's be angry and do not sin.
Oh, you'd have to ask St. John Cassian that question.
Well, I just was wondering what you thought about that, as far as, like thinking about what Bruce was saying. There's a difference, I think, between, as we've discussed, being angry about something because it affects you negatively, or because your pride has been hurt, and being angry because of a righteous cause.
Well, I think it's all.
We've been given anger, right? Can't anger be a good emotion?
It depends on what the motivation is.
If it's directed right. And
it depends on what your motivation. So why did Christ get angry at the people in the temple and flip over tables?
That was he had a good cause. There was a good reason.
Well, what was he trying to do out of love for the people that were selling that stuff in the temple?
Show them how they had their priorities all wrong.
So he did his motivation. His motivation was love. And that should be the same with any type of anger that we're going to show. Now, I don't know exactly what St. John was. That's why I asked the question, because I'm not sure exactly what he was talking to. But with any type of anger, it all has to do with what the point of the anger is. So, for example, you got angry at your son not because you just wanted to show your superiority, but you got angry at your son because you loved him and you didn't want to see him make a mistake. And that goes with everything that we show anger towards. And it's when we show anger not out of love that we get in trouble. So we show anger to this politician because well, I can't use politics because it's such a mess. But you see what I'm saying?
I do.
Yes. There has to be a point to it.
Yeah, I do.
Is that what they call tough love?
Tough love. That's, yeah.
You don't know that yet.
Well,
You're too little.
I know. I'm working.
If I can just add something.
Sure.
My goal has to be to get to the end where there's no anger, because if I start trying to figure out what anger is good and what's not, I will be tricked. I will be tricked.
That's a good point. That's a real good point.
So anger is anger, regardless of where it's...
Anger is anger, but again, there is, and I think maybe that's what St. John Clement is trying to point out here, is that there is anger that is good when it's directed towards a just cause or for a just reason, for their salvation, right?
Right.
Now, again, I agree with you. It's best not to try to split hairs if we're not ready to do that. If you take a look here on, again, some page, he discusses that pride as the root of anger. Pride as the root of anger. Not love, not the hope of somebody to be saved, but rather pride as the root of anger. In this case here. Yes, ma'am.
On page 68, St. John also says, nothing is so out of place in the penitent as an unruly spirit, for conversion requires great humility, and anger is an indication of all kinds of presumptuousness.
Mm-hmm.
Humility remedies anger because it remedies pride.
Right. And it absolutely, and that gets back to that at the beginning of that section where he's talking about pride as being the root of the anger. So if we look at that anger and say, why am I angry? Why am I angry? Am I angry because I see somebody hurting themselves and that really upsets me out of my love for them? Now, maybe someone I know or someone I don't know, but I see somebody, putting their hand in the fire. It's like, man, that's really starting to upset me because I can see that they're going to hurt themselves. Now, if you say, get your hand out of the fire, they go, no. Now, you're going to say, now you're really upsetting me. Get your hand out of the fire. Do what I tell you and get your hand. Now, maybe then it starts coming to the point where, hey, I told somebody to get their hand out of the fire because I know best, that I know they're going to burn themselves. Now, maybe it's starting to kind of morph into a little bit of my pride because they're not listening to me, especially like a kid or something like that, right? Or somebody because I know best. So, I mean, if the pride is out of love, out of a concern for somebody, if the anger is out of love or out of concern for somebody, then, I mean, by the definition that he's presenting here, then it's good and it should be expressed. If the source of it's pride, then there's a problem. But to Marissa's point, maybe rather than trying to split that hair and trying to figure out, as you're in that situation and kind of, having this discussion with yourself, maybe it's just better to avoid all anger, not to be angry at all, and see where that takes us. But yeah, so, I mean, in that same section here, freedom from anger is an endless wish for dishonor, whereas among the vainglorious, there is a limitless thirst for praise. Freedom from anger is a triumph over one's nature. It is the ability to be impervious to insults and comes by hard work and sweat of one's brow. Freedom from anger, when he talks about that meekness. All right? And he's saying here, it's an endless wish for dishonor, whereas among the vainglorious, there is a limitless thirst for praise. Now, is this again getting out there trying to seek that dishonor? Trying to look for dishonor? Is that what we should be doing? Should we be looking for that martyrdom? Is that the intention? Probably not. Probably not. Because if we talk about the wish for dishonor, I would say it kind of gets back to what you're saying, Marissa. You're saying that I want this lack of anger. No, I want this lack of anger. I want this weakness, understanding that it is going to put me in a position of dishonor, right? It's going to put me in a position not to be maybe thought very highly of, which again is going to be an affront to my pride. So if you're able to put your pride aside and be able to confront it in that manner, then that anger, you're free from that anger because you don't have your pride in order to try to be angry about. Does that make sense? I know I'm kind of hammering away here.
It's kind of like you're willing to do the right thing regardless of the result.
There you go.
And you might be setting yourself up for criticism.
Right.
It could make you angry, but you're willing to suffer that.
Right, and then he goes on, whereas among the vainglorious, there's a limitless thirst for praise. So how would that be turned around into the anger part? That thirst for praise.
If someone feels like they've really, done great and nobody says anything.
Oh yeah, that's true. But as it relates to anger too.
Well, wouldn't that make them angry?
Yeah, it'd make them angry. And sorry?
It's their source of anger. They can't believe that they've been affronted by it.
Right.
They're in constant need of affirmation.
Sure. Sure. And they're talking about vainglorious, and they're talking about a thirst for praise. And again, this might not be a praise from other people, praise by other people. Where else is a source of praise?
Self-praise?
Good job, good job. We did a good job with that one. Right? And I mean, easy enough to do. You know, someone, again, the example, cuts you off on the road. It's like, oh no, St. Mike is going to pull over here. And I mean, that is just as bad. You know, I should have just, you know, gave him a rude gesture. I mean, because really, when you think about it, I mean, you're not escalating the whole effect of it, but still, you're not confronting that pride as you really should. It becomes vainglorious, just like everything else. It's just like everything else he discusses. If you're doing that for yourself, for your own self-praise, if you're doing that to set yourself up, whether other people see it or not. Again, this gets back to holding yourself up into the cave and, you know, being mad at the flint and being mad at the reeds and everything else. It really, you know, I thought one of the most interesting things I read is they said that the real test of character is what do you do when you don't think people are looking, all right? When you come up to a stoplight at some hour or some you know, road that's not traveled, do you stop? Or you just kind of look like this? Nobody's looking, I go through.
Depends on how much I've had to drink.
I was going to say, it depends on when the police are chasing me. But
now those darn cameras everywhere.
Oh, gosh, yeah, you gotta be
It's like,
good.
what do I do? I gotta be. It's not that I'm really a good person. Someone's gonna be
Rebecca, I hope you're driving. But thank you, Bruce. But yeah, but I mean, and that's the thing. So what do you do when nobody's looking? I mean, how do you act? Again, I think that kind of gets back to whether or not you can stand to be with yourself, and whether you think somebody is really looking, or somebody's really watching. You can say, well, God's watching, or something like that. But you can say, well, yeah, but does God care if I run the stop sign or run the stoplight?
So you can't say to yourself at the end of the day, I did real good.
There you go. Yeah, you got to take back that pat on the back, right?
And then, you know, I really handled it this time. I did a lot better.
There's one.
There you go.
You shouldn't say that about yourself.
Well, no, not if you did something that was wrong. You certainly can't. But I mean, you shouldn't really be. Again, that gets back to the vainglory. Sorry.
If you're working on these steps and you succeed, you can't acknowledge it to you. You shouldn't say to yourself, "Okay, you're doing a good job."
I think I would be very careful about that to make sure that doesn't turn into vainglory, right? It's like I made the step. It's like we kind of talked about that the first time. I made the step.
I think a good way to put it is, any progress in the virtues is only by the grace of God. And so
there you go. Yeah, exactly.
If we're feeling that way, we just say, you know, thank you, God, for helping me.
Right. And if it is by the grace of God.
That's what I'm probably
saying. Oh, you're
right.
Yeah. But I'm saying you can recognize it that you held yourself together at a moment.
Well, yeah, and I don't think that's vainglory, but I mean, it's as Sue was saying, if you do recognize that I made this by the grace of God, not by the grace of Mike, but by the grace of God, then who's the one who should take all the credit? Who's the one who should get all the... It should be God, right? But yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we win those battles, we should, you know, kind of mark it up as another victory, but it shouldn't be from the standpoint of being vainglorious about it. It should say, well, there's one down, but there's a million more to come. And again, if you know you're way back here on the scale, you still got a long way to go to get there. And again, it's God that gives me the strength to be able to do it. So I can't take any credit for it. It's, you know, great if you could, but yeah, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't turn around and beat myself and say, oh, you know, kind of focus on the negative necessarily, but just understand that we still have a long way to go, right? And I think that not only keeps you humble, but also keeps you trying too. If you think, like we talked about that, if you think you made it, then it's like, well, why keep trying? I've already made it. You know, why not raise the bar? Why not continue to try to work towards that perfection that we're called to be? Because you know, we're called to be perfect. Be perfect as your Father.
Has an expiration?
What's that?
That made it has an expiration. I made it. Okay, well, it has an expiration, you've got to make it again tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It has an expiration.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you got to make it all the time. Because, I mean, again, using the analogy of the ladder, it's easy to either get stuck on the rung or it's easy to fall off. As the icon shows, I was like that icon getting pulled off and dragged around. Yeah, there they are at the corner there. I like this one because it's got them by the neck. But yeah, I mean that's the whole idea. You're on the ladder, but you're not on the ladder for very long. And I guess the whole analogy is if you're not continually trying to climb up, right? If you're not continually trying to get better, then what are you doing? Are you walking back down? Are you falling off?
You're falling.
Yeah.
You're falling. You stagnant. There's no room for improvement. You're not doing anything.
Yeah. And so you have to constantly challenge yourself.
Resisting.
Absolutely. So and then I think we got another 10 minutes here. So I just wanted to cover the 3 stages of freedom from anger.
Deacon Mike,
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
sorry, but can you this quote that you just read, can we go back to the bottom of that page after it says, hard work and the sweat of one's brow?
Right.
And then it starts, how is pride the root of anger?
Mm-hmm.
He's not speaking of righteous indignation, anger at sin, but anger that comes from our wounded pride.
Right.
And then it goes down a little further and says, even when someone makes a fair and perceptive criticism, I'm sorry, I have my bad glasses back
That's right.
here.
With the intention of helping us,
Yeah.
anger is sometimes roused within us. Sometimes, either inwardly or outwardly, we lash out at our critic because we fail to see the truth that is being pointed out to us. For only when we are humble are we able to see things as they really are.
Yeah, I thought that part was so good because
Yep.
I know we all do that,
Sure.
We all have a hard time, even when somebody does try to do it in a fair way or, as constructive criticism. Like I was remembering one time, this is a long time ago, I was really upset about something, and like I said, I could get upset easily and, too emotional. Thank God, over the 40 years that I've been a Christian, it's gotten better a little bit. But I said something like, it's just driving me crazy. And Steve said, it's not a drive, it's a short putt. Like,
Oh my God.
And that was
Steve,
and that was true. It was true. It was true.
But how did you react?
But
You
it
thanked him for
ticked
pointing
me
it
off
out.
so bad. But I wish, I would have been able to just stop and think, what is he saying?
Right.
And I think had I been able to do that, I would have realized he was making, and he didn't say it in a mean way. He just said it.
little jab.
Just said it.
Did it
No,
sink in
it wasn't
later?
even really like a jab.
Did
It
it
was just,
sink
he
in
just
later?
said it. It did. It did. As
At
I
first,
thought
you
about
just-
it, I realized I do have a hard time with letting things get to me too quickly. And so I just think that it's important to remember that when we react that way, it may be because what this is saying here. We don't like it that the truth has been pointed out to us.
Right. And again, what does that come back to? Pride, right?
Yeah.
Pride's affronted. And again, you might not think of yourself as a prideful person. Maybe other people wouldn't either, but still, there's that little something in there was tweaked just right. And who knows? Maybe you felt he wasn't taking your concern serious or something like that. And so therefore, you got to ensure that he understands where you're coming from. But yeah, and that's a very good point. And anytime you see that, I mean, a lot of times it's tough. And it's the hardest when the person is probably right. That's when you're because if someone should go, I never thought about that, but instead it's like, because that's a source of your pride. Yeah. That's
That
really
old
hard
saying,
to be.
truth can hurt, the truth hurts.
Absolutely. So, let's see. 3 stages of freedom from anger. What's the first step? What's that?
Cindy said, keep your mouth shut.
Shut up, yeah. Shut my mouth. The first step towards anger is to keep the lips silent when the heart is stirred. Wow. So, again, the P word, pride. Someone says something, someone does something, and they talk about your heart getting all stirred up, and getting all, what's the first thing you want to do? They yell and shout and, right? So that's the first step. Okay, so we mastered that. What's the next step?
No, we haven't.
Well, come on, we've got to make progress here. We only have 5 minutes. We've got to make some...
I want to start getting angry.
Let it out. Let it out.
I got into therapy or something.
We need to have pillows or something to beat each other.
There's a couch up in my office.
Strangle each other.
So not only to keep your voice quiet in the presence of anger, but your thoughts as well.
So the next step is to keep your thoughts silent when the soul is upset. So again, you can see this being kind of progressive. Now, again, there might be someone who can do one, but not the other. I don't know how, but maybe they could be silent in their soul, but still be out there yelling at you. I don't know. I mean, the thing is that first of all, shut up. Secondly, keep your thoughts silent. So again, this gets back to kind of like what he was talking about the guys in the cave, right? Having fits, just yelling and screaming at somebody, reliving this, replaying this over and over again.
You're calming yourself when you're keeping your thoughts silent.
Sorry?
You're bringing yourself down. You're calming yourself.
Well, sure. And the thing is that maybe even instead of trying to rationalize it, like say, well, let me think about this for a minute, and trying to rationalize it and step through, maybe then you realize I should be angrier than I am. Again, and that's a tough thing to do. So you can keep the mouth shut, but then you got to start working about those thoughts. Let it go. Very tough. Very, very tough. Because it's easier to try to think, well, what did I do wrong? What did they do wrong? How would I have handled that situation differently? Analyzed everything. But they're saying here, be calm. Then the last part, is to be calm when unclean winds are blowing. What? Unclean winds are blowing. What does that mean?
Insults.
So don't take offense to anything.
There you go. Don't take offense. There's situations that are going to make us angry that aren't maybe intended to make us angry, but they do. There are other situations that are intended to make us angry. We know there's probably people out there who want to bait us to try to get us going for whatever reason. Don't want to talk about politicians, but maybe politicians out there that want to get us angry or are trying to solicit a reaction for whatever reason. So as far as those unclean winds, because they're unclean because they're producing unclean thoughts. They're producing this hatred, this anger, stirring up your pride, right? So it would be great to try to avoid those kind of situations. And each person pretty much knows what those situations are. I kind of think of like someone who's trying to quit smoking. They say, well, if you want to quit smoking, don't put yourself in situations that you always used to smoke. Right? What was that? Maybe I'd call up a friend or when I'm having my coffee or something like that, driving in the car or something, doing something. The idea is don't put yourself in that situation or try to alter that habit so that you're not picking up a cigarette. And maybe that's the same thing here too. We got to think about that. What are those situations that we might be in that cause those kind of anger, those angry thoughts that get us riled up, where we can't close our mouth, we can't settle our thoughts, we can't calm our thoughts? What are those situations and how do we avoid those? Right? When we all become saints, we can march right into those situations and walk right through it without getting angry. But at least for me, until that time, I would just try, at least for myself, to try to avoid those situations. And you usually know it's like, well, if I go up to that person with this, I know I'm going to get an argument, so what's the value? If it's something that they have to be confronted about and told, then you do it with as much love as possible, right? As much kindness, and just say, here's the situation, and then get out of it. But, if you go up there knowing that there's going to be an argument, you get ready for that argument, right? You got it all planned out. I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that. And then you come in there ready to do battle, then I think what you're doing is not calming those thoughts. You're just actually preparing yourself for it and expecting that. Maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised and maybe you won't have that confrontation. Then you say, boy, I'm glad I was prepared just in case we did. Or if it did, then you say, I'm glad I am prepared because now I can fight that person, toe to toe. without looking like a fool. My pride. The final step is not to take offense at insults or to be grieved by injuries. How few ever truly master anger. But to master anger does not mean to become incapable of it. On this point, let us be absolutely clear. All right? Even our Lord became angry when he saw people turning the temple into a marketplace. We talked about that. And he became furious with the hypocrisy of the religious elite. Talked about that too. If it is indeed true that Christ, in his humanity, right, who's still a human, is like us in every respect except sin, then we cannot say that all anger is sinful. Does that make sense? As the psalmist says, be angry and do not sin. Right?
Could we read that last paragraph, though? Right after that, it's the most beautiful paragraph in the whole chapter, and it has to do with next week.
Okay, of course we must sometimes be careful when we speak of Jesus as an example, for as God, he had a right to do and say things no one else had a right to do or say. But this makes the example of profound humility we see in his passion all the more powerful and relevant for us. For he expressed no anger when he himself was a victim of sin, although no one but Christ could ever claim to be undeserving of the disrespect and suffering. Our ultimate example is the King of Glory, abused and crucified in humility and love.
So now you're all going to be looking at the cross next week and thinking about this.
Absolutely.
Great. Wow. And so there's still a lot more here. We're almost done. But I'm going to tell you what. I'm going to stop right there. So
could you just briefly, if I may, just indulge me for a moment?
Yeah.
Talk about singing. Is that why the choir is so big? The prescription for anger gets our anger out, right?
It should be bigger.
Yeah, we should all be up there.
we should.
That's right.
Singing in moderation can occasionally ease bad temper.
That's right. Singing in moderation. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we go ahead and we can pick that up? I don't know what page is that, Bruce?
71.
How about page 70?
Can you be in a bad mood when you're singing? I mean, can you sing and be in a bad mood?
Depends on what you're singing.
Yeah. Ozzy Osbourne or something.
Yeah, right.
So we'll pick it up at, not that I've ever sung that, a prescription for anger. We'll pick it up there on page 71 next time. Okay? So good. Thank you, everybody. I know I want a couple minutes.
Remember, Monday after St. Thomas Sunday, this will pick back up on the 8th.
Okay.
There won't be any now this week, and there won't be any break week, so a 2-week break. And then,
Monday, Sunday is the 8th.
oh, then I'm sorry. You're right. It's my anniversary.
Oops.
Yeah. That's on recording too.
That's right.
Oh, delete. Oh, I think it's a deleted, I get it deleted.